A curse is something negative that has the power to trap things within it. So it defines itself, and you know that it exists because there's some negative effect that you can see, and then this effect keeps happening no matter what you try. Even if you know and correct for everything that's supposed to explain why this detriment happened one time, and you don't believe in invisible forces, if for some reason it keeps happening, you have to acknowledge that there's some unknown chain reaction causing this effect to reappear. And that's the whole definition of a curse. There's nothing that needs to be supernatural about one. It could just be a domino effect that beats the target down while keeping itself going. Like the last words of someone you care about, telling you to achieve some goal, and eating away at you while they grow louder and louder until you accomplish it. Cursed energy is called that because it's a supernatural type of energy that easily causes curses. But with or without the supernatural, you can reliably say a curse exists whenever you can recognize that you're trapped within some flow of consistently having negative things happen to you. Which means curses often have two properties. A lot of curses are hard to see, and a lot of curses create cycles. If you think of nature at its core, of time itself, as one big chain reaction, where anything that shows up in the world causes the behavior of everything else to respond to it, you can think of a curse as a branching domino chain, running into a bunch of other ones and hoping it has an effect. Because every one that exists can be explained as their own chain reaction, branching from the big one, and they cause all sorts of chain reactions as they move through the world. The ones that stick around are the chain reactions that turn into feedback loops and sustain themselves, and they have a better chance of surviving collisions if they're chain reacting into something from behind its field of view rather than colliding head-on. There's strength in hiding, and problems have the tendency to create cycles over time, because the domino effects that tend to persist are the ones that can form easily but can trap people easily. So the curses that tend to emerge throughout the world are ones that are naturally able to keep people from perceiving them, but are also not physical, because thought is easier to form and abstract logic is harder to see. In the short span of human history, the chain reactions caused by people's complex brain activity have turned the world on its head, and the concepts people are stuck spending mental stamina on no matter how far civilization advances, in other words, their fears, are subjects that consistently align people's brain activity, which means they unintentionally direct where entire groups of people's mental energy is being spent, leading to concentrated chain reactions without most individuals who contribute to them even realizing. But this also means that most curses humanity becomes trapped under lack any physical bodies. So if someone has enough mental energy to see the abstract logic that's tough for most people to imagine and that naturally falls into their blind spots, and they've got the talents to meaningfully act on the internal logic they can visualize, then they can spend their mental stamina on curses to counteract and dispel most of them, as long as their stamina and talents are enough to overpower the keystones of those curses. This is the core idea behind the power system of JJK. If you can start to understand the world as chain reactions, and see the larger chain reactions your entire life has always been a part of, you can turn them into sources of strength, because the opposite is also true. If a curse is so strong to you that seeing it won't make it possible for you to dispel it, then even if its original premise is negative, its reliability can become one of your strengths, because you can lean on its sturdiness and align it against your problems. The final words of Yuji's grandfather were able to overpower his natural hesitation and let him push through the fear he felt to try to save his friends. Tokyo Prefectural Jujutsu High School is designed to be a setting where characters with the right potential can learn to use curses against other ones. And one domino effect in JJK is that each year of students fits within a specific theme based on their story relevance. In the one-shot of JJK, the first batch of students we were introduced to were specifically themed around this introductory idea of using curses as sources of strength. Yuta cursed himself and learned to channel that into a weapon to grant himself a cursed technique and the powers of a special grade sorcerer. Inumaki lost his ability to speak in return for the power to use stronger magic words. Panda was using the life given to him through cursed energy circulation to fight cursed spirits. and Maki lost her ability to use cursed energy, which is based on the visualization of chain reactions and the talents to act on it, in return for better physical stamina and abilities, as well as the potential to break free of cursed energy, which would make up for not naturally having the mental stamina to see curses, because they wouldn't be able to narrow your field of view and keep you from seeing them in the first place. Maki's the one we care about here because the topic of this video is heavenly restrictions and what causes them, which seems to be one big chain reaction that's been going on across Japan's history. A type of chain reaction that keeps itself stable is a feedback loop. That's where the pieces of the chain reaction lead back into each other, repeating the effects. But because every flow is a branching current of a larger flow, like how any person's life story contributes to the history of the entire world itself, whenever any behavior or property becomes a feedback loop, some larger context still changes as the other aspects of some overall chain reaction it's a part of are still moving in a straight line. Sometimes the wider effect of a feedback loop is that something increases and snowballs. Other times, the wider effect is that something balances itself out. But you can attribute any feedback loop to an endless number of larger chain reactions in the universe, because there are an endless number of other interconnected chain reactions you can relate it to, and an endless number of ways you can group them together. So these descriptions are just ways of simplifying individual effects, which is useful when trying to efficiently analyze what a specific loop directly impacts the most. What this means for JJK is that every chain reaction is part of something larger, and when a feedback loop has no distinct wider effect, then even if it's perfectly self-sustaining, new complications and context will emerge and change over time that will at least impact the rest of the world as a result of it. The big chain reaction that shows up in JJK, that's responsible for heavenly restrictions and the plot of the entire series, is the feedback loop of cursed energy, which snowballs certain problems and balances other forces out, but causes wider unpredictable chain reactions to complicate it over time. Throughout JJK's world history, the consequences of this one chain reaction are what have led to Japan receiving more cursed energy than anywhere else, the emergence of the three big families, and the problem of the Heian era, which itself led to the birth of Sukuna and the pure barriers that were later used by Kenjaku in the Culling games. And the reason seeing things as chain reactions is important to JJK is because one of the main messages of the story is that when there's a big feedback loop you can't do anything about that has strength over the world, you can make the most of it when you identify the mechanisms behind it and the mechanisms it works through. Strong analysis is the ability to see and impact what's naturally invisible, turning curses into benefits and negatives into positives. The naturally strong have the power to and are incentivized to create feedback loops in order to maintain their power and accumulate more. This gives a select few a vantage point over others to maintain that vantage point and traps the masses beneath them. The weak have to come up with roundabout solutions to solve problems without power, and in doing so, develop a stronger level of reflection, which gives them a better understanding of how to make the most of the external powers and opportunities they're given access to. So this itself is a natural feedback loop that produces two kinds of people that complement each other, because while the strong create their own feedback loops and divide themselves from the weak can then learn how to make the most of those feedback loops around them and advise the strong. But a secondary consequence of this chain reaction is that these groups are naturally divided from each other, because the strong who create and maintain their own beneficial feedback loops are incentivized to double dip and exploit those advantages further at the expense of the masses. And because these feedback loops are naturally invisible and beat down on everyone under that vantage point to reinforce that power divide, there's a bar people have to meet where they need to be perceptive enough in order to be able to see and stay ahead of the downsides of those feedback loops. So a big takeaway from JJK is that if you learn to see a stable feedback loop around you and analyze how it specifically works, you can elevate yourself from being blind and vulnerable to ways people can exploit it to being empowered by it. Now, before we get into loosely speculating on how this could explain the timeline of JJK, to get practice with identifying feedback loops, and then identifying the actual specific mechanisms that let you make the most of them, let's practice with today's sponsor, ExpressVPN. One example of a large feedback loop is the internet. The reason there's only one internet is because it started as a web to connect devices from anywhere, which is expensive to build and maintain. But successful brands and websites would have also seen the security and marketing value in domain exclusivity and be incentivized to support the idea that a specific link will always take you to the same website. So now, no matter which browser you use, typing in this link will take you to a page where you can find out how to get up to 4 extra months of ExpressVPN and directly support the channel if you purchase a 1 or 2 year plan through it. But one big vulnerability in using the internet comes from how everything is a two-way connection between IP addresses. A website link is just a nickname for a server computer's IP address that directs to it in a global database. And personal computers use an internet service provider to ask websites to send HTML files back to their IP, which their browser can then follow instructions on to generate the content on web pages. It would be super easy to profile you if anyone was logging every time your IP connected to a computer over the web. If someone knew where you visited and when, they could cross-reference that with other devices and real-life details to narrow down who you are. Then by guessing what someone with your habits and life story would have as personality traits, they could easily reference a bunch of character profiles they'd have on other people to predict your insecurities and vulnerabilities. So if people running any websites under a business model where they already gain from you visiting them ever wanted to, they could easily benefit a little more by making another web between each other where they log where your IP visits to slowly build up more information about you. And thanks to the anonymity a collective web would give them, any individual in that network would be free to use predictions of your potential needs and valuables and ways you can't fight back to do whatever they'd want and whenever they'd see an opportunity. Security is about minimizing risk because everything is a two-way connection and you need services tied to you like electricity and your ISP to use the web. So the way you want to do this for the internet is by dividing who knows your IP to be the select few pre-established parties you use the web through, while any outside device you can then connect to will have no way to connect who you are. And that's where I use ExpressVPN. You can use the internet through ExpressVPN, which means when you go to a website, your computer will send the signal to ExpressVPN, which will use one of their IPs from your choice of one of 105 countries to connect to that website for you, and then pass the files back to your browser. ExpressVPN encrypts these signals, so as an added bonus, your internet activity is even shielded from your ISP or anyone trying to spy on you on the same internet connection. And you can also use this to get around geo-blocking and watch anime on streaming services that have blocked them in your region. Yeah, I saved the best for last. But for that security side, even without the YouTube channel, my work has me doing research and design over the internet, and the security and content ExpressVPN provides are essential. So find out how you can get up to 4 extra months by clicking the link in the description box below or scanning the QR code. We don't know how JJK's universe started, or whether cursed energies had a level of sentience the whole time. But at the very least, the way it's set up to seem to work is that cursed energy is a byproduct from humans' complex brain activity that started flooding the world when humanity began. Back when people didn't know anything about the world yet, and had to learn cause and effect through unbelievable amounts of guesswork and pattern recognition, while struggling to survive against all sorts of invisible threats, there was no way to tell what was chain reaction and what was coincidence, without countless sacrifices and losses from trial and error. Everything was a guess, and if you spent too long trying to understand one hazard, you'd be taken out by another. So imagine if someone finally figured out the idea of temperature, and that they could stay warm in the cold by insulating their shelter. But then, despite what they were just able to make sense of, they somehow found themselves getting cold again, like there was always some opening in the shelter letting the outside air reach them, even though they could see that every wall was still sealed. Humanity would have had no way of ever adjusting to the world on their own when curses started forming. Cursed energy is designed to be a mechanic that easily makes curses, so it's not innately visible to people, and it's good at keeping them from recognizing what it's doing, like a feedback loop. It naturally exploits the limits and vulnerabilities of people's awareness and lines of sight. That's why cursed energy can be used in veils, to prevent people who are vulnerable to it from ever realizing what's happening within them. And it's also why it can form invisible dangers like cursed spirits that would seem to betray all reason and security. Another property of cursed energy is that it easily connects with itself to form larger cycles over time and surround the rest of the world in additional chain reactions. It's hard to fight a curse if that curse traps you in a feedback loop, so your own actions to deal with the problem feed back into it. This is why when harnessing cursed energy for long-term effects, It's like directing a flow of water that you know is going to keep moving on its own, past the range where you can continue directing it, and in ways you might not be able to see coming. At some point, cursed energy connected across the world and took on a life of its own, surrounding the planet with a vague will, a loose intelligence, and trapping humanity in a regulated balance with curses for better or for worse. Now, when there are unmatched curses, humans can suddenly be born with a specific unlikely mutation to be able to see and wield cursed energy. But when enough sorcerers are born to overwhelm the world's curses, more misfortune will happen to cause more curses to appear. The will of cursed energy can now intelligently influence what traits people are born with to fit the regulation of the planet's cursed energy. And it's the start of a trend where sorcerers emerge with stronger abilities, resulting in even stronger curses, in a vicious cycle humanity will eventually be trapped between the growing pieces of. So, one of the first people who can wield cursed energy, maybe even the first, comes up with a plan. Because cursed energy can now influence who will be born ahead of time, as people's opportunities to be born fit into the planet's regulation process, they work with that. If they use their own cursed energy, they can direct this regulation process to change the direction of the larger cycle, so that instead of the levels of curses and sorcerers increasing over time, the will of cursed energy will try to reduce them, and have less cursed energy emerge across the world whenever there's enough cursed energy to regulate it. In theory, the world's cursed energy would be undoing and minimizing itself. But a sorcerer wouldn't be born with a technique that lets them do this. If anything, as one of the first sorcerers born ever, their technique would probably be designed around how they can use cursed energy to their full advantage, without a system in place yet that regulates the potential of sorcerers. Human creativity and mental models are the most effective when learning of and dealing with nature, because nature follows consistent rules. But as soon as you interact with another person, your rationale no longer has any stable footing, because your POV now has interference from the awareness and chain reactions of someone else who's simultaneously adapting around you. Mental models try to take root in nature, but other people's other POVs interfere with that and undermine the process. So you end up with a civilization based on first come, first serve, where those with the highest vantage point have the most clarity, and everyone born after them can be raised in the noise of overlapping speculation and invented ideas, where they never have a clear path to understand things, and those progenitors don't have to worry about their own clarity being destabilized by ever being mutually observed. Being able to control chain reactions without your POV being regulated by a council or history of sorcerers means you have the ultimate power over everyone else, to freely see how to use chains and do so to maintain your advantages. You can use cursed energy to be untouchable, keep yourself safe, make sure you have avenues and advantages to survive any long-term hurdle or future complication, cement your power, and monitor how the rest of the world will flow around you. So, you'd get a technique that gives you immortality like Tengen and Kenjaku, and the clarity to know how to see cursed energy as an unstoppable flow to try to direct rather than override. But Tengen and Kenjaku have immortality in completely different forms. When the will of cursed energy, I'm calling it a will, but for all we know, it's more like a flow that just connects things to each other, so it's like an intelligence because it naturally does this with increasing complexity over time. When it sees the opportunity for someone to be born, it takes into account how strong their potential is, what them being able to be born somewhere signifies, or who they're born from, as well as what talents they could have, what genetics, and what behaviors they're pretty much guaranteed to develop. And as these traits all mutually define each other, they become a soul that turns into the center of gravity of this person's existence. All of these traits then manifest from. And cursed energy is able to shape this soul by regulating which opportunities can emerge in the world and which traits align to define someone's existence. Although, to clarify, the soul without details can exist ahead of time, so the world can recycle people's existences. It just needs to be in the right place and compatible with the opportunity to be filled with new details as it's pulled into the world and reincarnated, which it does over and over again as it spends time in the afterlife shedding its previous traits until there's nothing left aside from its trajectory and maybe whatever an available opportunity for life would also be compatible with. The idea is that people who shed enough traits of themselves to move on seem to do so in a process that distances their souls from the physical world, at which point they'll be tied back into the world as they fall closer again due to gravity, by developing more details that align with an opportunity to be born at their incoming position. Cursed energy acts as a funnel that directs souls into specific positions for the sake of some balance. And it does this by making it so that people who are born end up having traits that intelligently reflect their position in their era. If you're going to be born with the talents to overcome curses, you can be born with the ability to wield cursed energy, which also makes it easier to focus your stamina and see curses, and which the bar is lower for if you have the advantage of being born into a family who pass down knowledge with that clarity. If you're going to be driven by something specific for your whole life, the will of cursed energy will encode it into a part of your brain meant to direct your brain activity toward that idea, which is a cursed technique. So anyone with the ultimate advantage, the first properly gifted sorcerers, would get something like immortality, to reflect how they can use their power to maintain their advantages, preserve it from others, and with the disparity in these resources and advantages, always find some avenue to solve problems before they worsen. In other words, unlike most people who gradually lose the advantages they're born with over time, faster than they can preserve what they have, someone with the ultimate advantage over others is blessed by the world at other people's expense, and so disproportionately, they're able to use that to gain and benefit more than they'd lose over time, rather than be beaten down by the continuation of nature, like what's sustainable for everybody to be able to do. Tengen's immortality automatically finds ways to keep them alive over time. So as they continue aging, their body evolves to the point it becomes something else that lets them survive anyway. The kind of power given to someone born first and with a monopoly over cursed energy that makes them better off than other people. With that came a natural understanding of cursed energy and an affinity for barriers, because those are effectively how anything is able to exist in the first place, and would let Tengen continue staying on top, like their innate technique would direct their brain activity to get them to want to do. To summarize, being born with clarity and freedom meant Tengen would get the immortality technique, because the survival instincts of somebody with elite advantages would likely get them to want to isolate, purify, hoard, and snowball what benefits they have in order to not have a limited lifespan, which you can only afford to counteract if you maintain so much of a power and freedom gap between you and everyone else. This technique then influenced their brain activity to want to isolate and find comfort in creating layers of separation between them and other people, in order to protect their strengths by keeping a distance. But because they were so free, Tengen had no reason to want to be selfish. They just found comfort in separation and saw the bigger picture of cursed energy causing curses that would chain react into more curses. So they realized if they could use barrier principles, which fence off a region with cursed energy, in order to give a user power over what's inside and how what's inside connects to what's outside, they could play into the nature of cursed energy and complicate its emerging cycles further, using their mindset of gatekeeping and maintaining increasing control through cursed energy, but in a way they could think of that would help the rest of the world, which would be doable in 3 steps. First, they'd find some island distanced from the mainland, somewhere offshore they could move to, where they could enact their plan without the barrier they'd make bothering the rest of the world. Here, they'd set up a barrier which is the shape cursed energy takes to more easily establish power over both an area inside it and how that area relates to the wider world that connects to it. A barrier is kind of like a posture for cursed energy use that makes using it for these kinds of effects more feasible. One of the benefits of simplifying the power system to how it's based on chain reactions is that it simplifies a lot of the logic behind some of the ways cursed energy can be optimized, like with barriers, binding vows, and crossing a river. Just like how a basic material that's good for heavy and sturdy weaponry, like iron, would have better or worse shapes it could be forged in for pointiness or being aerodynamic, there are structures and patterns you can apply cursed energy through for better or worse effects. One example would be crossing a river, because if you think of the flow of a river as some chain reaction that has a bit of strength to it, creating the shape or movement of being able to cross a river helps carry some effect around a domino chain that would be holding you back. You can even think of ecosystems and status quos as chain reactions that reinforce themselves. So maneuvering a use of cursed energy around a chain reaction helps avoid the resistance that flow would give against what you're trying to do. Binding vows are based on the trade-off required to split a chain reaction. If you're creating another cycle within cursed energy that exists on its own, you can rely on it for power rather than your manual use of CE, which means you need to limit your behavior to set off an intelligent cycle of cursed energy wanting to sustain itself in some kind of rhythm, and you need to avoid whatever behaviors or circumstances would have the cycle collide with you head-on. Cycles rely on a balance to maintain themselves, so there's strength in sacrifices and giving yourself specific disadvantages, because it means emerging flows in the cursed energy connected to you could treat you more favorably to balance them out. So the second step is that the barrier is used in a trade-off. Now that Tengen settled on some island that's separated from the rest of the world, if the barrier is used to make the levels of cursed energy increase specifically on this island, the trade-off would be that the world's cursed energy is motivated to make them decrease everywhere else. This gets you the situation with Japan, where cursed energy levels intensify because its people generate more cursed spirits and give birth to stronger sorcerers, while the rest of the world produces minimal amounts of cursed energy to balance out. But in the long term, these two steps on their own aren't a sustainable solution. Tengen can only hold onto their form for so long without unraveling into something unruly in order to live forever, and the levels of cursed energy will keep building up within Japan until they overwhelm the barrier. Not to mention, given how cursed energy naturally connects things and creates more complexity over time, new interpretations or consequences of the barrier could emerge in different ways and eventually undermine Tengen's purpose for it. So that's where the third step comes in. Similar to rivers and binding vows, barriers would represent a way to use the properties of the fundamental way everything exists in the world, because if anything is a branching chain reaction that still fits within the big one, it would come into existence because the direction or speed of its flow would be split from the others on its level. Branching chains can distinguish themselves by cutting off and diverging their flows within some region of a larger chain reaction, so their individuality and stability come from the separation of their flows and the momentum keeping those flows strong. And that relative difference in movement can be considered a divider. In other words, anything's existence comes from some kind of conceptual wall distancing it from anything else, similar to a T-fields in Evangelion. And barriers are how you apply cursed energy to this concept in order to stabilize or optimize something you're trying to do. So river crossing uses the shape concepts take in order to maneuver around resistances. Binding vows use the process to create new concepts in order to outsource precision and power. And barriers use the resistance of concepts as extra reinforcement to add to their power. So for the third step, to keep the system's flow strong, Tengen would have used cursed energy's tendency to complicate itself and produce more cycles and effects over time as part of how the system keeps itself going. The system could maintain itself by keeping Tengen around, and it already works by controlling the traits people can be born with. So in theory, another cycle just needed to be added to the system, or emerge naturally if Tengen just let the cycle made from cursed energy do its thing, like Kenjaku does with the culling games. An exceptionally powerful sorcerer would be born every now and then, followed by stronger curses, so that instead of naturally increasing the average amount of cursed energy each year, the sudden jump would make the nature of cursed energy want to balance it out by fixing the cursed energy rates within Japan on a slider that would go back and forth every 500 years. So even though the exact amounts can vary, the flow is no longer on a trajectory to increase Japan's levels of cursed energy in one gradual direction. And if the system rigs it so people are born who can fuse with Tengen's body in order to offset Tengen's aging, like a super plasma donor, then the influence of the world's cursed energy could make it so this exceptionally powerful sorcerer would be born destined to protect an especially compatible vessel for Tengen whenever one becomes necessary. And this cycle could maintain Tengen's role and the levels of the world's cursed energy for the foreseeable future. Then all Tengen would have to do is step in and reinforce the barrier with additional ones whenever any oversight gets out of hand. In the Heian era, the cursed energy levels got a little high, while a consequence of Tengen's plan was that sorcerers trapped in this system would develop the mindset to cling to the limited power they had, creating a sense of hierarchy that became sort of a curse on the nation itself and led to someone like Sukuna being born in opposition to it. So Tengen stepped in to create more precise barriers that improved the suppression of cursed energy. Only issue was that this solution ignored the human cause behind cursed energy levels increasing, the emergence of a social curse of hierarchical and self-serving mindsets, from how Tengen's system created a hierarchy of sorcerers and rewarded people with the selfish outlook to preserve their own power. Because Tengen, the founder of this system, naturally had a limit of their own. Because they fundamentally drew strength from isolation and hoarding, without anyone above them to put limits on their power, they never knew how to read or understand others, which was why the consequences of human nature's response to being trapped in a system, like the one Tengen created, were a blind spot Tengen couldn't account for. It's possible this third step wasn't Tengen's plan at all, and the cycle made from cursed energy naturally found a way to keep itself going in the long term. After all, cursed energy's adaptability makes it feel like it's alive, although it's not good at seeing the full implications of things, which means there are limits to how well it can plan for the future. So even if it naturally flows into some kind of feedback loop and creates complex behavior to keep cycles going, it won't be accounting for how the pieces it makes for those cycles might chain react themselves and cause future complications. Kenjaku takes advantage of this, of how cursed energy intelligently finds ways to keep cycles going that it doesn't predict or analyze ahead of time to create the culling games. But it made society within Japan much more tragic than Tengen would have wanted. Thanks to the barrier, any sorcerer without Tengen's level of freedom would think they're born within a rat race. So you have groups of people fighting each other to affirm and preserve whatever statuses and advantages they can. Tengen just wants to maintain the fundamental system keeping the world safe, and the most natural way for them to do that is to keep to themselves and let a hierarchy form beneath them. But anyone born who can see that their own potential is limited by some surrounding system would understandably get a bit agitated and develop a mindset where they're more concerned for themselves. This is what gives us the Council of Higher-Ups, where the people in charge of the sorcerer world are the ones who have been able to take advantage of the system for personal power. And it's also what gives us the three big families, who maintain power through blood ties, knowledge, and hierarchy. Because these are the three big tricks allegiances of people can use to improve and preserve their powers. The first is blood ties, which is why powerful groups of sorcerers form family units. You can't change your blood, and you can inherit all sorts of rights and talents. So if you form a strong family bond, you can take advantage of numbers more efficiently than you could with a found family. Each of the big families specializes in one of these three tools, and their cursed techniques embody it. So the Kamo clan have techniques themed around blood, and counter to what you'd assume, their head technique of blood manipulation doesn't come from the leader being able to control their family, but from how a strong head of the clan can be a weapon themselves for the sake of their family. Blood manipulation controls the user's own lifeblood, because they use their own life to fight for their family, which you can see in how it affects the personalities of the users, like how Choso and Noritoshi only care about and sacrifice everything for their loved ones, and in how it lets Choso sense when something happens to them. It's the clan's signature technique because you want someone with this outlook to have the power to hold the family together and snowball what they have. But of course, because people see power as an opportunity to take advantage of each other, it's hard for the Kamo clan to keep passing down their head technique over time. It's more likely that people born into an elite clan will care more about the power it gives them than the people in the family, so less members are going to be born with blood manipulation. After all, being born with a cursed technique is a combination of being destined in the near future to have that personality trait, and the universe seeing that personality trait as part of what your birth in the world signifies. Being born as a member of the Kamo clan signifies the continuation of their lineage, but the way the world is set up naturally makes sorcerers grow up selfish. So in Tengen's system, the trajectory of the Kamo clan is one where their signature technique emerges less and less often. The second tool people can use to stay in power is gatekeeping. Thousands of years ago, the writing system that was eventually brought to Japan from China, and probably known by Tengen, would have been used to maintain a class divide. Because Tengen likely would have been born a combination of high class, talented, and signifying human resistance to the misfortune of curses. If you're an adult peasant struggling with daily needs, you've got less opportunities to pursue an education, while those born elite have better opportunities to learn academic subjects while they're growing up, keeping the upper classes educated and the lower classes unable to escape their struggles. aside from manageable exceptions who would be so few in number they could be moved up in the system without disrupting it. But one thing you can do to make this divide more effective is gatekeep, because some academic theory only has as much power as it does when nobody else can understand it. Academic knowledge is a form of analysis, like finding out the tells people have in poker, where you're recognizing patterns people's behavior naturally falls into because of the limited ways and chain reactions they're able to function through and learn to function through in the first place. But if people know they're being read, they might act differently, which reduces how much you can predict or control from certain information. If a poker player figures out they have a tell, they can put in the extra work to hide it, or try to take advantage of the knowledge for themselves. In other words, with knowledge, there's more power in the fact that it's invisible, which makes people want to keep it invisible. And that's why, on top of naturally being hard to see, cursed energy also goes so far as to actively suppress people's awareness of it. There ends up being a trend thanks to the nature of cause and effect, where sources of power tend to remain stable by the cycles that define them, and the select few that use them developing a way to blind people to them. So knowledge, like academic theory, was gatekept so it could keep some of its power the same way people are blinded to curses. And one subject that had been studied by the educated in China, going back those thousands of years, was mathematics, which was useful in various ways because, for example, if you understood numerical relationships better than a peasant and could easily read large-scale changes to supply and demand in the economy, you could infer people's individual desires in ways they wouldn't even consider. And even if you don't have the talent or precise insight to see how you can apply mathematics to the world around you, you can at least pass the education down so one of your descendants with the right vision might be able to, giving your family a way to thrive in the long term because someone will likely eventually be born with the talent to apply theoretical knowledge. And this is the basis for the Gojo clan. Their one technique we know of is based on the limitless potential advantage of theory, and how you can use gate-kept academia and division to potentially keep yourself untouchable by holding everyone else back, as long as you have the right talents to efficiently spot and practically apply it in real time. The theme comes from manifesting, so applying your ability to imagine impossible numbers, like negatives and infinity, which are abstract concepts because numbers are a form of language used to analyze the world around you, and the limitless specifically takes after more advanced analytical theory, which lets you tell how the answers of endlessly long equations will converge. In other words, limitless is based on converging theoretical and applied mathematics, because you need an extra talent to apply any theoretical mathematics, but it lets you see the world around you on an entirely different level from anyone else. So the technique is the theory that can be passed on to anyone, and the 6 eyes are the talent to efficiently apply it to the world you see around you, but that also rely on being able to see more clearly than everyone else for optimal effectiveness, which would chain react into limiting other people's clarity as long as they exist. So their user is destined to hold the rest of the world beneath them as long as they're around, and prevent anyone else from manifesting them. Which is why, every now and then, the will of cursed energy makes it so only one of the people born with the limitless technique has eyes that can naturally, precisely, and efficiently see the flow of cursed energy, letting them afford to apply the complicated effect of their technique to the world around them. I'm imagining they're called the 6 eyes because, similar to the idea of seeing the flow of karma in the world around you that traps everyone in the cycle of reincarnation across 6 realms, someone in Tengen's barrier inheriting an elite education is destined to be born with eyes that can clearly see the flow of its cursed energy, which make it effortless to spot and set off chain reactions, elevating them to a vantage point in a whole bracket above everyone else as the ultimate form of weaponizable information clarity that comes from and creates exclusivity. It's a similar naming style to the star plasma vessel, and like the star plasma vessel, an example of how the universe can give someone a trait based on something their birth signifies, but that isn't a cursed technique. Because people can be born with any traits to fit the scenario of who they reincarnate to be, so you can even get special organs or physical characteristics. Cursed energy is generally flexible, like how techniques can even incorporate modern technology or other mechanics like domains, and reverse cursed energy. But techniques aside, this also explains how people can be born with heavenly restrictions. The world's cursed energy can cause people to be born with any special traits, as long as they fit whatever that person's birth signifies, taking their near future with their early development into account. So a heavenly restriction just comes like a curse technique, but from when someone's birth position is that their talents have some specific trade-off that would noticeably impact their ability to see and fight curses the traditional way. And this brings us to the Zenin clan. According to legend, the first emperor of Japan was blessed by the heavens to travel the land and conquer people, and as he did that, he ended up having to face off against another guy who was also blessed by the heavens for a similar reason, because they were both meant to rule the same area. So considering they were both given these divine blessings, and could in theory just work together, the guy or his son gave in to the first emperor and became his loyal ally. At which point either that guy or his son dedicated his army and blessings, 10 sacred treasures, to the emperor, and the 10 sacred treasures could be used in a ritual to bring someone back to life, so they were a way to strengthen the emperor's reign and empire. This is the basis for the Zenin clan, because they specialize in hierarchy. So the theme behind their techniques is that they can use their existing blessings and advantages to widen the gap. If Ogi has a sword like the special ones the clan collects and passes down, he can make it even longer and stronger. Junichi and Chojuro can make larger fists with their cursed energy, where Chojiro's are made from the earth itself because he's older and more of a foundation for the modern era. Ranta can look down on anyone to hold them in place, and put his own durability on the line to strengthen it, because the advantages in numbers and power he's starting with mean he can already overwhelm most people he does this to, and he has allies that will step in while he's holding someone still. And the head techniques of the clan take this a step further by being themed around authority on top of overwhelming opponents with their pre-existing advantages. Both the 10 shadows and projection sorcery are based on forms of animation, because not only can someone who maintains a hierarchy exploit that pre-existing advantage over others to overwhelm them and snowball their power, they can use their authority as a leader to rig what happens further. But the difference is that whereas the 10 shadows is given to someone inheriting the potential to conquer, and gives them the desire to force themselves and others into a unified hierarchy, projection sorcery is given to someone that recklessly accelerates the hierarchical worsening of the clan, and gives them a shallow and flat understanding of things they use to quickly judge and categorize everything around them. So, as the worsening of the hierarchy made it harder for more members to be born with the free potentials and mindsets to conquer others, making the 10 shadows rarer, and animation technology improved in recent generations, so projection sorcery became the technique that ruled the clan thanks to its increase in power and the clan's strength-based hierarchical nature, the Zenins ended up with a shallow leader who believed in a two-dimensional idea of human value and made the clan suffocatingly worse. So under Naobito's leadership, the Zenin clan became so strict with its hierarchy that despite being a clan of sorcerers, it became a form of curse itself. And even though most people born into the clan would either be crushed by its hierarchical nature or find a sense of superiority through it, if someone was born into the clan who would reject and clash with its values and still grow up to be defiant, the fact they were able to be born would mean their birth would signify a resistance to the Zenin curse itself. And since the curse of the Zenins comes from them being sorcerers who use cursed energy, the big blind spot of Tengen's plan, this rebel would be given the ability to break free from cursed energy itself, immunizing them to the ways cursed energy can trap and blind people, and granting them improved physical abilities. So the first time this happened was with Toji, but because the heavenly restriction specifically let him break free from the clan, he ended up not having much of an ambition or plan in life, and wasted his opportunities to grow or accomplish anything. Sure, this seemed to free up someone with the 10 shadows to be born again, but Toji was just drifting away from the clan when an opportunity presented itself for someone with as little ambition as him, and as a result, the clan was never confronted and it was never changed. So the world's cursed energy adjusted for this, and the next time someone was going to be born like Toji, they were given a twin, who could keep them attached to the clan and eventually harness their natural defiance against it with their final words. So that seems to be the idea behind heavenly restrictions. They show up when they're gonna show up, but there are a bunch of chain reactions going on in the world that make a heavenly restriction make more or less sense to show up in a specific person. And that person's near guaranteed personality and starting point in the universe should justify whatever restriction they're supposed to get. But unlike a cursed technique, they wouldn't necessarily have a part of their brain that forces them to continue thinking in a way that fits their restriction. So it's different from the formula for cursed techniques. So if there isn't a piece of their brains forcing them to spend mental energy in one specific way, what exactly is giving Maki and Toji the mental sturdiness to continue defying the Zenin clan? The will of cursed energy would have only given them their type of heavenly restriction if it thought that either with or without being blessed with that heavenly restriction, they would be able to grow up defiant of the clan. You can think of cursed energy's future sight like the rolling stones in JoJo, where thanks to the nature of cause and effect, of physical actions having consequences across the passage of time, and being what allow future physical actions to take place, the pieces of the interconnected universe can align so that somewhere, some vantage point over the rest of the universe exists that's kind of like a center of gravity, where you can easily spot and predict connected chain reactions, but also have the greatest chance of shifting them by attacking this load-bearing point directly. Cursed energy makes things gravitate toward certain positions and predicts what things will do, so with those abilities combined, it can pretty much keep most of the world moving on a predictable track, even without being truly omniscient. But it never sees the chain reactions of the chain reactions it predicts. So it's only reading the future moment by moment, and that means it's creating its own blind spots, but making up for them most of the time by dragging loose pieces of the world into place anyway. You can see this with how it can grant a prophetic technique like Charles's, which reads a target's future but can't predict background details or people freed from cursed energy, who count as buildings to cursed techniques. At least, I'm assuming the technique can't predict Maki's actions for that reason. But by granting Maki and Toji their heavenly restriction, the will of cursed energy is making itself unable to see them or continuously rig their behavior, so why would it have been confident that they would stay defiant of the Zenins? In the real world, I could have a fear of maple syrup. Without even realizing, this could mean a slight pause whenever maple syrup is brought up, or a general aversion to situations or tasks where maple syrup has a high chance of being involved. And because other people are observing me as much as I'm observing them when looking at my surroundings and gauging my environment every time I go somewhere, whether or not they even pick up on the fact that I avoid maple syrup, my consistent behaviors in response to it could change how my interactions go with other people whenever I'm in proximity to the concept. If I'm feeling anxious in a kitchen and someone walks by greeting everyone they see, but they pick up on my negative expression when we make eye contact, it raises a little flag in their head and gives them a batch of potential impressions of the situation or takeaways to keep in mind that would be different if my expression was casual like everybody else's. And if I do this every time, the unease adds up. So because instead of freely fitting different contexts, my behaviors in proximity to maple syrup will always be consistently influenced by this fear, whatever ways my behaviors would chain react to other people's behaviors will also be consistent in proximity to the concept, and their responses could cause something like a feeling of unease to build until a physical change happens as a response. If a new roommate builds an impression that I don't like them, or there's a secret wrong with the kitchen nobody's letting them in on, and eventually they move out years sooner than they would have if I never gave off that impression, then my fear chain reacted into discomfort that accumulated and made it so they could never get good sleep living near that kitchen, which accumulated further until they physically left thanks to this maple syrup curse I created. Energy doesn't visibly exist, but is a measure of the ability for pieces of the physical world to change, which passes between those pieces as changes are caused to the collective state of the world through them. And in a way, because a consistent measure of something chain reacts, it's like a type of energy from my brain activity passes into the kitchen and builds until it causes a physical change to my roommate. But it's not like this thing you could figuratively label as an energy has direct physical strength. In JJK, the premise of cursed energy is that it does. But if brain activity can directly cause stronger negative physical effects, then there needs to be some kind of opposite force where the brain expends energy to balance it out, which seems to be what allows someone to stabilize their traits in the form of a soul, which can then let them continue to exist beyond their physical body. The abstract logic holding a person's existence together is reinforced and held together in the form of a soul as that brain activity produces cursed energy, which destabilizes and destroys things. So what would it mean for someone to be born who produces 0 cursed energy? If their soul can't produce cursed energy to balance its stability out, it would need to be supported by something else, like the body itself, from however that body is built. Their body would intertwine and reinforce the soul in place of making cursed energy through mental activity. So it's no wonder there's a bit of extra sturdiness that gets Maki and Toji to keep defying the clan. It also explains what happened back in Shibuya, where the seance technique was used to try to copy Toji's body, but ended up copying his memories and personality from the rest of his soul too. If the soul is more ingrained in the body, and also what defines the body, then they're more of a package deal. This would be different for people with a standard heavenly restriction. Zenins get a special case that removes them from cursed energy completely because of the significance of their bloodline. But usually, someone just trades off one thing they can use and gets a superpowered form of whatever they would be able to use to compensate.